Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 21st regular business meeting of the Board of School Directors. I'd like to start out with audience recognition, that is public comment on agenda items only. So there'll be opportunity for comment at the end on any school-related issue, but can you please sign in with Ms. LaPera? And there's a 3-minute limit, and you can state your name and where you live.
Ms.
Okay,
Jenkins
my name
already
is Ruth
signed
Jenkins. I live at
You're already ahead of the game. Thank you.
354 Worcester Road. The two agenda items that I'm interested in getting information on is this recommended action for Dr. Stephanie Height and also the action for Ms. Kendall Glauner. On the following page, or the page following this, you have itemized the cost of many, many different events and situations, but you've not given the cost of these two items, and I really would like to know how much this is going to cost us. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have?
Dr. Marseille, do you know off the top of your head the cost of each of the consultants?
Sure. Miss Dr. Stephanie Height is a consultant that is working with all of our staff in providing professional development on the Danielson framework and the PRP. So I think the contract will not exceed $23,000 for 15 potential sessions that she will be leading, and 24. And Ms. Kendall Glauner is at in the IU, and I think it's 5,400.
And all of this work is required of us because of the newly state-mandated teacher evaluation system. And Dr. Stephanie Height is a certified trainer in the new model that the state adopted and requires us to use, but didn't fund the training of.
Okay. Is there? I don't see anyone else. So we're going to move on to routine approval of the minutes from the September 23rd regular business board meeting, the October 14th education committee meeting, as well as accepting the minutes of the following committee meetings: October 8th curriculum, October 11th policy, October 17th facilities and purchasing committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
I so move.
Thank you. And a second? Thank you, Marissa. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion carries, and I'd like to turn it over to Dr. McGinley.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This evening we have two reports as part of the superintendent's update. The first one is on high school enrollments and facilities issues. Some of this was presented last week in the meeting we had with the civics, and some at the facilities committee meeting on the 17th. We have some new information that we're presenting tonight on parking and traffic studies. And the first report is handled by Mr. Orlando and Mr. Gannan, and that will be followed by Mr. Gannan and Ms. Hoffer from Gilbert Architects, no relation to Dr. Gilbert, with an update on the Walsh Valley Middle School expansion designs.
We'll bring up the slides, please.
It takes a minute.
Okay. You should be good. I won't sing.
While we're waiting for the slides, how about that? I just want to announce that's the Education Foundation of Lower Merion, which supports community. I'll finish it though.
Go ahead.
Supports all of our schools is having their 4th annual trivia night and auction on Saturday, November 9th at 7:30 at the Kinwood Club. And I believe you can get tickets by going to our website, and I think it links to their website. So I encourage everyone. It's a enjoyable evening, and now I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go over the enrollment numbers. You've probably seen these before, but I'll go through them. Back in a decade ago, the CAC came out with a report looking at the high school enrollment. So this is a graph that they constructed quite a while ago. So if you look in the 13-14 year, the enrollment according to their chart was 2,340 students. It peaks just over 2,500 students in the 2006-07 year, and then in the 18-19 year, the enrollment declines to just under 2,200. Taking the same graph, we added two lines. The red is actual figures, so you can see in the beginning years, the numbers were relatively close, and then the actual kind of dipped, and now has exceeded where the CAC projection was. Projection was. So if you look at the 13-14 year, current enrollment for high school based upon the 10th day is 2,485. And if you look at the purple line, that's the Dijon Healy study going out to 21-22, just over 3,200 students. Just kind of illustrate how the enrollment history, particularly in the last 6 years, this is for the entire school district. And you can see in the 08-09 year, the total enrollment was 6,812 students. And as of the 10th day enrollment, the total number was 7,859. So we've grown over 1,047 students, and we've increased over 15% in the last 6 years. You've probably seen this graph before, or this chart. We've added a couple years in there, so we've added the 10th day enrollment for the current year. So if you look, I'll call it the tan box, I guess the 0405 cohort, which is in third grade at 463 students, which are currently now the 12th graders in the 13-14 year. They've now increased to 607 students, or have increased 31% in that time frame. You can see going all the way back to the, I guess, current fourth grade cohort, all those years have increased double digits. And then the enrollment projections, you've seen these numbers. We've made some modification to the BC adjustment. The BC adjustment with those students from the BC Middle School going to Harriton. We had used an initial BC adjustment of 15 students. We looked back at the numbers and decided a more conservative approach would be to take the difference of a 4-year period prior to 08 and 4 years after. We've excluded the actual class of 2013, which is 32 students, because that was relatively higher than any other class. So we've eliminated that and came up with a difference of 4 students. We've adjusted the BC adjustment and those expanded choice numbers from 15 students down to 4 for the BC. So if you look at Harriton, at the, I guess, a 60-40 split, it was 1,202 in 14-15, and we get to the 21-22, it's actually 1549. So what does that mean? If you look at the original 60-40 split, that 14-15 number would be 1,213, and then the 21-22 number would be 1,600. So you can see how we've changed by modifying that BC adjustment, and then we did the same thing at the Lower Marion. So you can see the numbers at Harrington have come down slightly, and the expanded choice numbers for Lower Marion have increased. Okay, I'm going to turn over to Pat Ganane, who's going to talk about the facilities considerations.
Good evening. Some of this you've seen before, so I'll try to move quickly through it. I'm going to speak about classrooms and then parking and traffic. So I'll go over the classroom information, and then I'll be joined by Mr. Frank Tavani, who is our traffic engineer, to talk about traffic and parking. These are the 3 scenarios that we looked at. These are the same numbers you just saw in Vic's slide. The first scenario is what we call scenario 1, which is the Dijon-Healy original projection, and that's the status quo. That's if no adjustment in attendance boundary was made, these are the projections for the student enrollments. The next 2, scenario 3 in green, scenario 2 in green, scenario 3 in tan, represent what would happen if we implemented the choice area, the expanded choice area, and then the students split 50-50 between the 2 high schools for scenario 2, and they split 40% Harriton, 60% Lower Marion for scenario 3. Because these numbers are increasing over time, we're just going to look at the last year, which is the highest projected enrollment, when we're trying to figure out how many additional classrooms we may need. The administration has determined that the capacity of the existing high schools is 1,400 students. So what you see here is a simple calculation of the projection, its difference from 1,400, and that number divided by 25 students per classroom and rounded up. So in summary there, what you see is under scenario 1, we would need 10 additional classrooms at Harriton, 7 at Lower Merion. Scenario 2, 4 and 13, and scenario 3, 1 and 16. So I'm going to go ahead now and talk about concepts we have for adding those classrooms. I'll start with Harriton. This is an overhead shot of Harriton, and I've got a circle around the back portion of the building where we would propose to make a permanent addition to the building. And this is in addition to the 3-story academic wing. The area that you see there highlighted is currently outside the building, and it sits right outside the fitness room on the first floor. So under the scenario where we need 10 classrooms, 4 of those would be science rooms. We would build all 3 stories that you see here. The second and third floor would both be science rooms, and then we would add 3 more classrooms as an infill over the top of the fitness center. In order to look at the scenario where we only need 5 classrooms, or rather 4, we just only build 2 stories. Same idea, just build 2 stories. The reason we end up with 5 is because by the time you build 2 stories, you end up with 5, even though it says we need 4. We're also asked to look at a temporary solution at Harriton. So a building would look something like this, similar to what we had in the past, which we refer to as the M building. This is a sketch that shows where we might place this building. Again, it's in the same vicinity of the school, right outside the fitness center, across the sidewalk. We would have sidewalks up here. This depicts a 2-story building. So each floor has 2 science rooms and 3 classrooms. And then, of course, if we needed the lesser option to satisfy scenario 2, we would just have a 1-story building. So these are the cost estimates for the classroom concepts at Harriton. Looking now at Lower Merion High School, where we would focus on the district administration offices. This shows the first floor, where we have already dedicated space to the Lower Merion High School in the form of the Downs Gym and the 2 classrooms that are located right here. If we needed additional space, we've identified 5 classrooms that we could make available on short notice on the second floor. The remainder of those rooms are occupied by offices, and in fact, some of the rooms highlighted in pink are occupied by offices, and they could move to the third floor. The third floor then is also a potential expansion area for the high school. So we looked at several options. The first option was to totally renovate the second and third floors and create 4 science rooms, depicted there by the S on the third floor plan. Because we need 16 classrooms, we're not able to get that on just the third floor, so we need the second and the third floor. And in addition, we have the 2 on the first floor. So classroom option 1 is to renovate second and third floor, create 4 science rooms. Classroom 1A is the same thing, only we just create 2 science rooms, depending on what the enrollment is driving us. The reason we looked at this is because if we're going to have to renovate the third floor, we're going to also want to do upgrades to the second floor. We don't want to leave the second floor behind. The major upgrade in this case is HVAC system. And then this is classroom option 2, where we only renovate the second floor and create 8 classrooms, of which 2 are science rooms. So as I mentioned, the primary work left to do is HVAC on the second and third floor and a group restroom on the third floor. There's minor classroom fit out with whiteboards and projectors. We mentioned the science lab and additional minor code upgrades. Other than that, the building has already had all of its major upgrades in the last renovation. This then is a comparison of the cost estimates for the options. We were also asked to look at a covered walkway between the new high school and the district administration office. So this is the architect's concept for that. This is an overhead view of that along with a cost estimate. And then here I've brought all the information together about the classroom options. Scenario 1 at the top there. If we were to build permanent classrooms at Harriton and add in the required renovations at Lower Merion, we would be looking at about $10.5 million. If we went with temporary at Harriton, and the renovations in the DAO, it's just over 7.1. Looking at scenario 2, our permanent is just under 9 million, our temporary is just over 7 million. And then scenario 3, we're looking at classroom renovations to the DAO of just over 5.2 million. Even though our calculations show that we need one classroom at Harriton, we would not do any construction for that classroom. We would come up with an alternate solution. Going back to the calculation of additional classrooms, I've laid this out on a timeline based on the projections per year. So this gives you an idea of how the requirements change over time. And then, of course, the last column are the numbers that I've been working with in the previous slides. I wanted to point out that in order to take any action, the minimum lead time we would need for permanent classrooms at Harriton is 24 months, 18 for temporary, and then 20 months for DAO renovation. And this is the minimum. This assumes that we have our consultants lined up and we're ready to go. We're now going to shift our focus to traffic and parking. As I've mentioned before, the township has the final.
At the facilities meeting, you were going to look into the number of science labs. There's a 154 number student differential. You're going to find out why the same number of science labs are required.
And what's in the report is based on what the high school said that they needed, and we haven't had a chance since Thursday to go back in and review that.
Do we have that information?
As soon as we can do it. There are other things going on too. We will get that information as soon as we can. It's based on what the high school principals told us they would need based on the numbers and the use of those buildings. So we'll go back and review it.
Okay, so moving on to traffic and parking. As I mentioned, the township has the last decision about parking and traffic considerations. Mr. Tavani has just completed a traffic and parking study. His conclusions project the future growth in accordance with our enrollment projections as well as background growth in the community. And so he is here to share that with you.
Thank you, Mr. Ganan. Good evening. So what I'm going to do tonight is go through several figures that will ultimately make their way into my reports. Some of the figures will be left out in the interest of time just because we have a lot of ground to cover, but what you see on the screen right now is what's typically the first figure found in a traffic study, which is just an orientation figure.
Mr. Tafani, would you mind sliding the mic closer to your face a little? Thank you.
Certainly. Figure 1, as it's shown on the screen, is just simply an orientation figure to show you where Lower Marion High School is relative to other streets, as we all know. Figure 2 is a satellite image of essentially the same figure, and figure 3 is a three-dimensional satellite image. This figure is included to benefit the reader by showing the different parking lot areas, because that will come into play with the parking discussion, as well as it has some impact on traffic flow. As probably everyone knows, but just for the benefit of audience members, Lot A, which is shown in the lower right corner of this figure, is only accessed via a traffic signal opposite the Arnold Field driveway, which is now closed. That lot is primarily used by faculty and staff, although there are visitor spaces as well. Lot B, which is shown just to the left of Lot A, or to the right of the DAO building, these are all shown in blue lettering in the figure, as you can probably see. That's a very small lot that's reserved spaces just for the DAO staff. On the other side of the DAO building, this building is Lot C, which is the primary lot for DAO parking. To the north of that is a bus staging area, which is not really a lot and is not named. It's just simply for corralling buses at various times a day. North of that area is Lot D, which is a 44-space parking lot just for students. And then finally, Lot E, which is shown at the very top left of the figure, is the primary parking lot, and that accommodates faculty, staff, students, and all of these lots have disabled parking as required. The lower left of the figure shows the entrance, the main entrance to lots C, D, and E, which is the driveway, inbound only driveway near Schoolhouse Lane. The traffic then flows in a clockwise fashion around the high school and exits out to Owen Road and ultimately to Montgomery via the traffic signal at Owen and Montgomery. This is a detail showing where all these school bus activities take place. Again, the staging and the pickup and drop-off of the buses is shown in the quarter loop road in the upper right. Parent pickup and drop-off occurs exclusively in Lot A. The black line represents the path parents take as they enter Lot A. They turn 90 degrees to the right, head around in a counterclockwise fashion, and then stop approximately where the red dot is shown. In the morning, the parents just basically stop, the students leave, and then they go on their way, so no queue really develops. In the afternoon, however, parents arrive and begin to wait. A queue will form and basically spill back practically to right where that dashed black line is for a very brief period before students appear and the queue starts moving forward. And of course, that yellow line just represents an area where traffic that's coming out of parking spaces can bypass the queue, for example, faculty leaving at the end of the day. Now, the next figure in the report would have been volumes, because the first step in any traffic study is data collection. And 10 years ago, when we first studied this, and more recently, just a few weeks ago, when we did our studies now, we actually send personnel out who conduct peak period traffic counts at all the driveways and intersections in the area. Those volumes are then studied and redacted and put into a model that's used to predict performance, both in existing conditions as well as the basis for projecting the future conditions to see if there's any difference between what would happen under the highest projected enrollment scenarios Mr. Ganan referenced and the existing condition. Those performance units are called levels of service. So what you see on the screen now is a table that describes the levels of service at unsignalized intersections. The range is A to F, not unlike a report card grade, although there is an E as well. And these letter grades and these associations were promulgated by the Highway Capacity Manual, which is a federal document and was recently published in 2010 and adopted in January of this year. As you can see, level of service A is the most desirable performance. At an unsignalized intersection, it relates to an average delay of basically nothing or as much as 10 seconds. That means that, as you'll see shortly, if you went through a particular intersection at a particular movement and it says level of service A, and you did that an infinite number of times, on average you would wait less than 10 seconds. And you can get very specific and say 4, 5, 6, etc. Randomly, you might not wait at all, and sometimes you might wait a little bit more, but taken to an extreme and doing a statistical analysis, that's how long you would wait. At signalized intersections, a motorist is typically accustomed to waiting a little bit longer to be served, so although you still use the same letter grades, the thresholds shift slightly. And whereas at unsignalized intersections, the maximum is 50 seconds for F, it's 80 seconds at a signal. So with that introduction, that crash course in levels of service, Figure 6 is a summary of the existing performance at the intersections and driveways surrounding campus. The top half is the opening bell or AM peak hour, and the bottom half is the dismissal or PM peak hour. At unsignalized intersections, which have just stop signs on the side street, like for example, at the school driveway exiting onto Owen, where there's only a stop sign on the school driveway, the movements along Owen itself technically have no delay because there's no stop signs regulating them. So as you see, there's no letters, there's no arrows on Owen. It's only coming out of the school driveway where you can make a left or a right at the stop sign, have a calculable delay, and that's why you see a level of service shown only at that location. At a signal, it's slightly different. At a signal, everybody has to wait their turn eventually. So every movement, every approach has a calculable delay and level of service. You can also calculate an overall level of service, which is why the signals have these little squiggly arrows pointing to an overall. For simplicity in showing the figures, the control delay is only shown on an overall basis, and just the letters are shown on a per movement basis. And if, while I was talking, you glanced quickly at that figure, you'll see that everything operates, for the most part, at A, B, and C. There are a handful of Ds, but overall the performance is actually very good. There are occasionally delays, of course, and schools are notorious for having peaks within peaks. You know, you don't have a lot of activity over a whole hour. There's really a 15-minute window where it gets really crazy. And what this shows is what's the industry standard is to analyze a peak hour, a 60-minute window. And that's what these figures reflect. Of course, that's the existing condition. That's the enrollment at 1297. So the question becomes what happens in the future. This figure shows what the projected 2021-2022 condition is under HPE conditions using the worst choice, the worst of the three scenarios that Mr. Ganan presented, which was 1,784 students. So under that scenario, there's a 38% increase in activity at the site. And there was also some background growth, some just general growth of traffic due to population increases that has to be factored in, which it was. And what's shown in red on this figure is something that's different or worse than what it was in the existing condition. Something in blue is the existing condition for the overall basis. And the reason why you don't see anything blue on the individual movements is because Lower Merion's ordinance specifically says that you should maintain level of service C, but it doesn't say if that should be on an overall basis or a per movement basis. And the 10 years I've been practicing here, the interpretation has always been it's the overall that you focus on, but the township, much like PennDOT, reserves the right to focus on particular movements that it thinks are important. So for example, where you see the word Arnold Field written at the top, if you look above that, you'll see a red D in the eastbound direction on Montgomery Avenue. I'll slide back here. You see in the existing condition, that's a B. So it goes from a B to a D, and that in fact is the worst degradation during that peak hour. Everything else in red just represents a small change going from an A to a B or a C to a D, but that one eastbound movement actually represents a 2-letter grade increase, although frankly the B was kind of a high B close to a C, and this D is a low D close to a C as well. So, but the challenge of Montgomery Avenue is it's relatively narrow. You have 4 travel lanes. There's no exclusive left turn lanes. So on that approach, you have a through lane in the right, and then you have a shared left and through lane on the left. And one of the things that we were successful in doing over the last few years is actually introducing another phase at that traffic signal where there's a lagging left turn protection. After you get the green ball indication on Montgomery Avenue and both traffic flows, eventually westbound will stop and allow a courtesy for the left turn to get in, which helps a lot. But the problem is when you add traffic, because the enrollment increases, you're not only adding traffic to the entering movements, you're adding traffic to the exiting movements. So if we give too much green time to that lagging phase, we do it at the expense of green time elsewhere, either on Montgomery Avenue or on the driveway coming out. So it's kind of like a shell game, and you have to have a balancing act where you try and maintain the best overall performance, which incidentally, although it degrades from a B to a C overall, which does meet the spirit of the ordinance. And in preliminary discussions I've had with the township traffic engineer, it's frankly likely that there's not going to be any mitigation measure other than some additional tweaking at that intersection. The other intersections, the impact is so slight, it's unlikely there's going to be any remediation at all. Although one of the things I did notice over the last couple of weeks is the Owen Road signal is currently not affording enough green time to allow the buses to exit the site as quickly as I would like them to. And I'm already talking to PennDOT and the township about fixing that now, irrespective of any of these things. During the PM peak hour, which we've been neglecting for the last few minutes, at the bottom, things are better. And although there are some degradations as shown in red, again, they're all very minor and nothing going to a D or E or F anywhere. So that was it for Lower Merion. I was going to do Harriton traffic next and then do parking for Lower Merion and then Harriton. Since I'm kind of on a roll, I can keep going, or if you want me to stop and take questions about Lower Merion traffic specifically, I'd be happy to do that. Does the board have a pleasure?
I think you can keep going. Thank
Okay,
you.
so for Harriton, thank you. For Harriton, again, here's figure 1, which is the overall map, the satellite, and the 3D rendering. There are fewer parking lots, although there are more parking spaces at Harriton. There's really only 3 principal lots going from right to left. There's the east lot in the upper right corner, which is really just a faculty lot, the visitor lot, which is also the bus loop area, and the west lot, which is primarily students and a handful of staff. Off to the far left is the bus staging area, not unlike at Lower Merion. 469 total spaces. Again, this is just the bus activity and location figure like its counterpart for Lower Merion. You can see where the buses pick up and drop off, shown on the right, as I just mentioned. This is the parent pickup drop-off loop, which occurs in the west lot. The vehicles come in the west driveway, make a hard right, and go in a counterclockwise fashion around all the parking, stop where the red dot is, and then make their way out and back down the same driveway to exit. Again, we collected volumes, analyzed everything. In Harriton, there's only one signalized intersection. The majority are unsignalized. So figure 6 shows the same thing that we went through before, except here there are some constraints. This model is still being tweaked slightly. What I'll call to your attention is the west school driveway at the top, you'll see coming out is an F. If you look underneath on the bottom during the PM, you'll see a C. In my observations of the intersection, it's really more like the opposite. In the morning, it's really not that bad. In the afternoon is when you tend to get a queue of parents and students leaving that can get a little excessive for a brief period of time. It's such a unique condition that the standard models that we use as traffic engineers while allowing for some tweaking, are typically not really, there's certain variables that usually you don't touch, but in this case, to make it reflect existing conditions better, this is going to be tweaked a little bit more to reflect what's actually happening. But the point is that the west driveway currently has some constraints. The other intersections, such as the all-way stop controlled intersection of Morris and Ithan to the right, operates very well. Again, occasionally there are queues during a very brief period of time during opening bell or dismissal, but for the overall condition, it's level of service B or A. At the signal at Old Gulf, it's pretty good in the morning. In the afternoon, there once again is a problem on the westbound approach, not unlike at Owen Road at Lower Merion, where the dismissal activity overwhelms that west approach and you have an F on that approach. So here now is the projected condition again for 2021, taking the worst case enrollment, 1,684 students, which represents a 38% increase over the existing enrollment of 1,181. Everything in red represents a change. And for the most part, we have B's becoming C's and a few D's, and of course the west driveway, which stays in F. What's shown as in blue are the existing conditions for the overall intersections. And as you can see, everything is pretty much okay, except in the lower left at Owen Road, what used to be a D overall is now an F overall during dismissal. And again, this reflects the growth as well as the background traffic. Oh, and I'm sorry, Old Gulf. Thank you. Figure 8, which we didn't have for Lower Merion, is the same figure but with some improvements in place. That's because at Old Gulf, you can essentially, there's so much green time currently afforded to Old Gulf, especially during dismissal, that just the change of some green time to the westbound approach will greatly address the existing condition. And this, like Owen Road, is something I'm going to see if we can get done now, because although this level of service shows the projected condition operating at a D, obviously if that timing change can be made currently, it'll benefit existing traffic and make what's probably a D an A or a B. In the morning, again, there's not a problem. The other approaches, other intersections aren't really a concern. It's just this west driveway that's really problematic. I was there several times observing, what's going on, and it appears that even though there's relatively low volumes along Ithan Avenue, some of the motorists who are attempting to make a left, leaving the site, heading south on the driveway and heading toward Morris, are doing so with some trepidation. And since it's just a one-lane approach, anyone who's making a right is kind of stymied behind them, and the delay is cumulative for both rights and lefts, even though it's just a left-turning vehicle that's gumming up the works. So one way to address this would be to construct an additional lane on that approach. However, for it to be effective, the lane would need to be relatively long. If it was only 50 or 100 feet long, it would only be a queue of 1 or 2 vehicles waiting to make a left that would cut off access of other motors to get to that right turn lane. So typically, an auxiliary lane needs to be as long as not only its own demand, but also the demand in the adjacent lane. So it might go back, a third of the way along the driveway, if in fact it's something that is implemented. As Pat showed in his presentation, we have the benefit of knowing pretty much exactly how this traffic is going to grow over the next 5 years and beyond. So one of the things I should mention to the board right now is that all these are really, again, the worst case scenario for each school, which really couldn't happen in combination, and is something that would occur 8 years from now. So these conditions can be continued to be monitored over the next couple years, and other improvements could avail themselves that might benefit the site and the community. So we don't have an immediate problem with the exceptions of those timing issues. So now we're on the parking. This figure is a little bit on the small side, but I'm going to try to explain what it says. I know you have handouts. I apologize to people who don't. Essentially, we have the 3 different parking lots, and we have several different populations of motorists or parkers at each facility. We have faculty, staff, visitors, disabled, bus drivers, DAO employees, and people who might be anybody because they're not displaying any permits or hang tags or stickers. Now, you would expect that in a visitor spot, but if someone's not in a visitor spot and doesn't have a sticker or a permit displayed, they could be anyone. They could be an offending student, they could be a visiting teacher from another school, etc. So what we did is we made a number of observations on different days, which were all normal school days, different times of day, and inventoried not only the parking demand, the actual vehicles there, but assessed what permit, if one was displayed, in each lot on a per lot basis. So what you have in these tables on the left is a description of the lot on the left. The next is a description of the user type. The next is a description of the supply in that particular lot, how many parking spaces are supplied. In some cases, this had to be calculated. Lot B, for example, every single space, Lot B at Lower Merion now, every single space is marked reserved, so it's pretty easy to determine how many spaces are reserved. But West Lot at Harriton, there's only a handful that are disabled or carpool signed, and the rest could be for faculty if they decide to park there, it could be for students, et cetera. But the supply column is an attempt to quantify the supply based on a number of different factors, such as talking with Laura McCuson about how many student permits are distributed, et cetera. The next three columns are the observations that were made on a per lot, per permit basis at the times and days shown at the top. The column to the right of that is cherry picking the worst case of each of the numbers, each of the three numbers shown to the left on a per row basis. So it's not only taking the worst day that we observed, it's actually kind of inventing a day that didn't really exist at one point in time by cherry picking each one of these worst case scenarios and then summing that up at the bottom on a per lot basis. So that's the peak observed demand as it's termed. You compare that with whatever available supply is remaining today, again, if any, and then after taking that credit, because we'll fill those spaces in first before we would build a structure or do anything else, then you apply the projected additional demand based on the growth, which again in this case is 38%, and then see if you have a surplus or a deficit, and do that on a per lot basis. You carry that down campus-wide, and you see what's shown at the bottom, which Mr. Ganan blew up for the courtesy of all of us. And you can see that the 3 different days ranged from 339 spaces occupied to a peak of 349. But since we only were basing it on 3 observations, and since we want to give everyone a conservative estimate, the township and the school alike, we're using 387 as the worst of the worst to grow. We add 138 spaces, but we take credit for the 82 empty spaces we currently have, leaves us with a deficit of 56 spaces, 2021 worst case enrollment. That's at Harriton. Lower Merion, the numbers get even smaller. I won't go through in the same detail as I just did and just go right to the bottom line, which is we have a deficit of 79 spaces. That's it for my slideshow. There is a bullet list that was also included in the handouts that gives some thoughts about some ways to address traffic, parent queues. That's not shown on the screen, but if any of the board members have any questions about any of those bullet items, I do have a handout myself, and I could read through it if you'd like. Or if you have questions about anything I just presented, I'd be happy to do that now.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Are there any questions? Go ahead, Jerry.
Thanks for the presentation. That's a lot of information to absorb in a few minutes. I do have a question. The last few slides, the last couple slides, where you talked about future projected parking requirements at Lower Merion and Harriton.
Yes.
So I see you have your columns, peak observed demand, the remaining available supply, projected additional demand.
Yes.
Is that at the peak of enrollment?
The peak observed demand is existing conditions.
That I
The
understand.
projected additional demand is peak enrollment, and it's the worst case peak enrollment under 2021.
And does that assume buses stay on the site or they're moved off the site?
It doesn't really matter because those numbers reflect the demand associated with each type of permit. So if you have a student permit, you're going to grow 38% based on this HPE condition. So it's just the demand. Whether or not there's a way to address that by removing the buses, for example, and
In other words, if we took buses and bus drivers off site, we might not have a negative number, we might have a positive number, or it might be 0, correct?
exactly. And that is one of the things that, in fact, I don't know if you're going to get to that next. I think Mr. Ganan is going to get to that.
But my specific question is, does this assume that the buses and the bus drive, the cars that the bus drivers drive to the site remain on site at peak demand?
Yes.
So at the peak, and so this is 8 years from now, at the peak of enrollment, leaving the buses where they are and the bus drivers where they are, we're only 56 spaces shy at Harriton and 79 at Lower Merion on the site we're on now.
Yes.
Okay. It wasn't clear to me if that was what.
Right. And I just want to add to that and say that we're either one or the other, we're not both.
going to make that clear.
Yeah, I
Yes.
understand
okay.
that, yes. Yeah.
The
Thank you.
25 is shown as the bus driver demand, so it is.
Marissa? And Diane?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm trying to, again, as Jerry said, you presented a lot of data. Based on your observations, right now there are 67 unused parking spaces at Lower Merion and 80 at Harriton. So we're not using at all anywhere close to what our capacity is right now. Is that those last two, right? Because you inflated them arbitrarily. Right, the highest use you had was 364, but you made it 392, but that's not based on observational data. And the highest you had was 349, right, and there are 469 spaces available at Harriton. So we have right now 67 and 80 surplus parking spaces, is that correct?
I think that's correct. I'm looking at the numbers myself just to make sure I speak correctly. This slide shows that today there is a remaining available supply of 82 unused spaces at Harriton.
right.
And it's actually more than that because, again, I cherry-picked these worst of the worst conditions. So you could really just take the numbers all the way to the left, 347, 349, 339, and subtract that against the 469 space
Right,
supply
that's what I
available
did.
today.
Great,
So it's
okay.
really over 100 spaces that are empty, routinely.
Right, thank you, that's
You're welcome.
very helpful.
Thanks, Frank. This
Yes.
is great. Just one question. Were you able, or could you tell us what the population would be that would tip us over from having enough parking spaces to needing additional spaces?
Assuming that you left the bus drivers and everything.
Yes, assuming all, as you did with all of this, assuming all things,
To 14, 15.
are the same, when does the demand
I
put
understand.
us into a deficit rather than a surplus?
Under this conservative analysis, the number is 1,450 students at Lower Merion. And coincidentally, it happens to be the same number at Harriton, but that's purely a coincidence.
Yeah, that was very careful planning of way back. Thank you very much.
Just want to make one point.
Sure, go ahead.
So if I'm misstating this, correct me, please. So these are not township code numbers. These are demand and supply numbers based upon your observations. Township code numbers are likely to be very different from, code requirements are likely to be very different from these
That is
numbers.
not only correct, but that's an excellent point that I failed to bring up during my discussion. In the past, 10 years ago, when we looked at Harriton's demand, we did make similar observations and used that as a basis for parking supply for both high schools. But the township is by no means compelled to accept this empirical data in lieu of its ordinance requirements. In fact, one of the things it may do is say, we can use this as a starting point, but you should show where you could place parking in reserve on sites at some feasible locations in case this is wrong or things change that is code compliant.
And those code requirements are likely to be significantly higher than these numbers.
In some cases,
On
there
paper.
is similarity, but yes, they are higher.
Okay, thank you.
And the hope is that by presenting your analysis, that the township would lower their requirement for us.
If that's like a yes and no answer, because the hope is, the expectation, we've had conversations with them, and we have the historical element from 10 years ago, that they would accept that for construction purposes, but they're not going to grant us amnesty from the code requirements completely. You have to show feasible reserve parking somewhere on site so that it is code compliant.
And because you have to show feasible reserve parking, that's the reason why we have an approved on the parking garage at Walsh Valley and an approved parking garage at Harriton to meet the code requirements at the original approvals, things that we never built.
That's correct, and that's actually good evidence of why,
Right.
it might sound scary, but at Welsh
Right.
Valley, which goes back over a decade, and still isn't needed.
Right. We also have 5 years of operating this building with more than 1,300 students, up as many as 1,471 successfully with only 88 parking spaces for kids. So that's additional data that shows that, it's reasonable not to be with code, but to follow the logic of what we have and what the increase would demand.
When they allocated the 88, was the expectation that the student population was going to come down, therefore they were more willing to go with a lower number? Was that the,
I'd have to defer to Pat on the historic.
I didn't hear the whole question.
that when they only required 88 parking spots for students, even though our student population was, I think, 1471, I think that's what you said. But it was with the understanding that that was a number that was going to come down as the two high schools became more equal in population. So were they more willing to make an adjustment, knowing that it was, at that point, was not going to go up, but was going to go down?
To be honest, when we got our approval for Lower Merion, the numbers that we showed for student parking were greater than 88. And because there was no history of student parking here, we used Harriton as a guide, and we said, because of the unique situation here as compared to Harriton, we should have about half of what we have at Harriton. So, which is slightly over that, it's 120 some spaces. But in fact, when it came time to do student parking, the administration of the high school has been able to keep a tighter rein on that. And right now they're allowing 88, and it seems to be working just fine.
Yeah, just one, oh, go ahead, Marissa, do you want to?
Go ahead.
Frank, do you know what the code is, what the code states in terms of how much parking we need? Do you know what the code says,
For
asks
students or for the whole campus?
for our needs? So whatever, the whole shebang. Do you know, or is it, if it's A, it equals B, and if it's C equals F?
I don't know, but Pat knows.
Okay.
Pat prepared a spreadsheet and some calculations that.
You
look
should
at that.
speak in the microphone so that
Sorry.
it gets recorded.
Mr. Ganan prepared calculations that were based on code interpretations. I was providing the analysis based on the empirical data.
What I've got is the additional requirement. When we go in for approvals, that's how they analyze it, existing versus the future, and what the additional requirement is. The code requirement is you have to have one space for every employee, you have to have one visitor space for every 25 students, and you have to have 1.5 spaces for every 2 students of driving age. So if you lay all that out, our increased requirement, for example, at Harriton, where we have that worst case deficit in the future, is a total additional of about 146 spaces. Whereas I think Frank's future demand showed right his
Projected deficit.
right projected deficit. The LM number for the corresponding worst case, which is scenario 3, is 206 spaces.
But of course, we don't follow the code with what's approved now at that location.
Correct, and I think that's why the township has that, the ability to make us put spaces in reserve. Should conditions ever change, then that can make us make some adjustments.
What does it mean to put spaces in reserve? Can you explain that?
Sure.
So typically, the way the township works is if you can demonstrate that the actual parking demand is something less than what the ordinance requirement is, and that you can actually construct those spaces, or maybe even a little bit more than those spaces, either immediately, if they're needed immediately, or eventually, if it comes down later, then they'll consider that, provided that you can identify somewhere else on the plan where whatever the code required total parking is can be built at some point in the future, even if it has to be structured parking or underground parking or something. You have to show that it's feasible, it respects setbacks, impervious coverage limitations, things of that sort. But as long as you can show that if they ever feel parking is short and want to compel an applicant to construct it, that they have a plan on file that shows it's feasible and can be built. That's called reserve parking. So it doesn't really cost anything. It's initially, it's only if and when it's triggered. And as Dr. McGinley pointed out, at Welsh Valley, during a previous approval at Welsh Valley Middle School, there was reserve parking shown in a structure back in the 90s, I think. And that's out there, but it hasn't been needed. So
This isn't so much a question as an observation. In listening to this presentation and the discussion of parking, there seem to be at present 469 parking spaces at Harriton and 431 at Lower Merion. And we keep hearing from a few members of the public about that everything has to be exactly equal between the schools moving forward, but this is already a discrepancy of 40 parking spaces, so the two schools cannot, under any thing I can imagine, be equal. And they're not, the parking spaces are not equal now, and I don't hear a lot of complaints about that. That's just a natural deviation. It's still equitable, it's just not precisely equal. Which leads to, I guess, my second comment, which again is not a question for you, but that all of this, I'm not sure, I think we've strayed awfully far from our topic about expanding choice to 30 students or 30 students from Ardmore who might come to Lower Merion, which doesn't really impact any of this. We're talking about such a small number of students that I think we've just gotten really awfully far afield here.
Just one thing to your comment about the parking. My understanding is that the approval's here because of the fact that we have so many sidewalks. It's a much more walkable community on this side of the township, that there were concessions made here for parking that weren't granted at the at Harriton site because there's no sidewalks and so there are more drivers.
But just, in response to Marissa, in the comments I've heard about the schools being equivalent or not equivalent, it's never been about parking, it's always been about curriculum. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with them, but the topic I've heard has always been about the curriculum at the schools, and the programming, not about the parking.
I think both principals have established that programming is equitable.
But I'm just responding to your comment about the parking. My question, Mr. Devani, is there any parking, surface parking, so non-structured parking, that's in reserve at either site right now?
Is that part of what you want to do? Mr. Granan has a presentation. The answer is yes at one of the schools.
Yeah, and do you know offhand how many spaces at each site?
Pat, is that something you're going to show us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And the last question is, were those numbers taken into account in your deficits?
No,
Okay. Thank you very much.
they can be used as credits.
Right. Anything that Mr. Stefani indicated as a deficit assumes everything else is the same. Same number of employees in this building, same number of spots built or not unbuilt. So it's assuming the site stays the same and the utilization stays the same.
Okay. Are there other questions? I think this might be something you're going to address, Pat, so if it is, I'll just wait. But I know that there's an issue with increased enrollments requiring an increased number of buses. Is that something you're going to be addressing in your?
No, not directly.
Okay, so then my question is, I guess we do have a sense that given the increasing enrollment, we will need to have, is it 20?
About 20 additional buses.
About 20 additional buses? Is that
Right, it may be in the 15 to 20 range.
in the 15 to 20 range?
We have already added 4, so.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to need to talk about how we're going to accommodate those increased buses
Somewhere.
at either site or
Right.
off-site at some point, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think you can continue now, Pat. Thank you.
What I'm going to do,
I'll be right back.
what I'm going to do is just kind of pick up where Frank left off on the parking and talk about some more particular options. What I've done here is summarize some of the numbers from Frank's big spreadsheet. And by the way, you have copies of all the spreadsheets. There are 6 spreadsheets. There's one for each high school. There's 3 scenarios, so there's 6 spreadsheets. And these numbers reflect kind of a summary here. So it's the same minus 56 that you saw before. It's the same minus 79. But you can see that they occur under different scenarios. And so what we want to do is just focus in on the deficits projected out in the future. And I think Frank did a good job of explaining how he got to those. They're very, very conservative. In other words, they're very worst case. So I'm going to take a look at Harriton and show you some of the concepts we've looked at for creating additional parking at Harriton. This is a picture of the Harriton site, and you can see again with the total parking. Buses are located in the upper left-hand corner. And here I have actually highlighted the reserve parking because there is reserve parking approved at Harriton. There are 20 spaces here along the driveway, and these spaces, the impervious surface associated with these spaces and the stormwater management has already been incorporated into the project. The rest of the spaces, 96, are encompassed in this rectangle here, which represents a future parking deck. And at that time, we'd have to go in for more approvals, and we'd have to make the arrangements to handle stormwater management and any additional impervious. It's placed on top of the existing parking lot to minimize additional impervious. In our case, we would have to compensate for the bioswales that would be lost. So the first thing we can look at is, what if we park the buses at Harriton just like we park them in Lower Merion, what I call valet style. And so we take that area where buses are parked now, we reconfigure it. As you see there, we create an additional 19 parking spaces for a cost estimate of $170,000. And I'm referring to these as parking designs A and B so we don't get mixed up with scenarios, et cetera.
And does the 170 include the 20 reserve being actually built, or is this just for modifying the parking?
This is just for modifying the parking. This is the cost for building the 20. And then another option would be to construct another parking deck. And as we looked at this as to how we would actually do this, we thought it was more feasible to construct it over top of the faculty parking lot. And so what you see here is a deck that represents up to 82 spaces for a cost estimate of $2.4 million. And I think you have the incorrect number on your slide. I found an error. It's $2.4 million.
Hey, Pat, the valet style parking, you didn't include a cost, an annual cost. Obviously, there would be some jockeying to do.
There would be, yes. So then the last option is, what happens if buses move off-site? And in this case, we have to reconfigure the bus parking area so that we can still allow buses to come in and fuel. The fueling islands are on the right-hand side.
So just make the point now, we have discussed the idea of buses going off-site. We don't have a place for them to go.
We don't have a place.
But we also know that adding another 15 or 20 buses means we're going to have to find some other places to park buses in the future.
Correct. Correct. By condition of approval, we are limited as to the number of buses at each high school, 25 at Harriton, 24 at Lower Merion.
That is if you buy the buses instead of leasing,
Yeah, contracting out the service, yes, that is an option.
Okay, so I'm showing a cost estimate here for reconfiguring this lot. It assumes that we're moving buses. There is no cost estimate for the actual move of the buses, since we don't have any more details on that. So in summary here for Harriton, if we looked at scenario one where we need 56 spaces, if we combine plan A and B, it does not give us enough spaces. So we'd be looking at either plan C or D. C is the parking deck. And of course, we wouldn't have to build all those spaces if we didn't think we needed them. Plan D is moving the buses off-site. Going down to scenario two, where we're minus 10, you can see there's a couple of options there that we could pick that would give us that. And then scenario three requires no action because we have no parking deficit. Looking now at Lower Merion, again, this is a picture of the site. Montgomery Avenue is on the right-hand side. The lettered parking lots are shown with A and B in the front, C, D, and E around the side and in the back, and the bus parking is indicated. We were able to thoroughly examine the site and come up with a way that we could squeeze 13 additional surface parking spaces on site, and we're pretty sure stay below the impervious surface limit. And where we do that is basically you pick up one space in lot A, you pick up one space in lot C, you pick up one in lot E, and then we could actually create 10 spaces along the driveway here. And this is on your way out of the site. These are the art rooms over here. This could be a potential 10 spaces. But after that, we're looking at structured parking, and we're looking at having to build over the top of where we currently store buses and have our second, the small 44-space parking lot. So this represents a deck that's built out over the top of that. It's at the same level as the C parking lot right next to the DAO, and there's a connector driveway to get in and out. And you get an increase of 78 spaces.
And it's at the same level as parking lot C, meaning it would not be visible from Montgomery Avenue.
Correct. And then lastly, if we were moving buses off-site here, there's really no cost to do anything on site other than restripe, and we gain 44 spaces. But as at Harriton, if you move the buses off, not only do you get the real estate the buses were occupying, but you get about 28 additional spaces because the drivers and the aides are no longer parking there. So again, if we look at this summary for Lower Merion, scenario one, we had a deficit of 29. So it looks like we're looking at a deck, although we certainly don't need as many as 78 spaces shown there, or moving the buses off. Scenario 2, the deficit is higher, so we're looking at the same options. Scenario 3, we're at 79. Our deck gives us 78, so that's close enough, I said. However, moving buses off gives us 72, and we're still a little bit short. So we could, in fact, build the additional 13 surface parking spaces. But this is so far out that this is something that we can keep an eye on and make a decision when the time comes. And that completes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Pat. Jerry?
Thank you. So Pat, we're talking about the maximum projected enrollment. It's a long way out. It's 8 years away. But since we're working with those numbers, our worst-case scenario that we've just heard from Mr. Devani is negative 56. We're 56 short at Harriton, correct?
Yes.
Assuming buses stay there, bus drivers stay there, assuming no expansion of buses on site. If we valet, based on your numbers, if we valet the buses and we build the parking in reserve, we make up 39 of those spaces.
That's correct.
So based upon building the maximum amount at Harriton, based upon the maximum population projection, we're only 17 spaces short at Harriton. So we just want to inject a factor here that we're really not talking about. In my view, and we've had this discussion before at the facilities committee meetings, it's very difficult to make this decision without knowing what your complementary bus costs are if you locate off-site. So for instance, if scenario 1 versus 3 versus 2, if there's a $4 million difference that suggests you go to Lower Merion, but you can put all your increased population at Harriton, leave the walk zone alone, not make any change, and you put a lot of money into classrooms, if the cost to relocate buses off-site, if you pick a number, 4 million, 5 million, 6 million, it really could equalize the numbers or make it, change in favor of the other scenario. And I would suggest that if we're talking about numbers that are 8 years away and we're only 17 short, and I don't know what Mr. Devani would say about it, that I would really try hard to go to the township, and assuming that was a better scenario under a total cost perspective, including both the classroom construction and the off-site bus facilities, and make the case that we can save some money here, probably $1 million or more if you forego, if you get a variance. I know that's not a township decision, it's a zoning hearing board decision, but it becomes a different question if you're talking about doing or not doing another off-site bus facility in addition to the annual operating costs you incur if that bus facility is not in a convenient location.
I would agree. So there's some unknowns there. However, if you were to look at moving buses off-site, whatever the cost is, it benefits you at both sites.
Well, of course, there's a significant cost to that.
Of course.
Yeah. Continuing costs. And then the operating costs continue every year depending on what they...
That's true.
Okay.
Depending on the location of an off-site. It could be minimal, it could be a great expense.
It'd be an improvement if it's in where
Right.
where the population is.
Right.
It's absolutely the case.
Because we're heavily loaded with buses at that end of the township right now.
Agreed.
Diane?
At Harriton, we said that there's already parking in reserve. There's a parking garage in reserve at Harriton. Do we know, was that like sketched out as to where it was?
It is. It's in this dotted rectangle shown here.
Okay, so it's the one over the existing main
Right.
parking lot in the front?
I just highlighted, that's actually a shot from the approved and recorded land development plan, and I just highlighted the rectangle, but that is
Okay.
where it's shown.
And in order to make any of these changes, do you have a sense of how much time you'd need? I imagine if all you're doing is restriping, it's, a couple weeks, yeah. Well, I was going to give it time to dry. But if we're talking about a parking structure or whatever, what do you, would that be the same as any construction, 20 to 24 months?
That's what I would say right now, 20 to 24. And the other thing to keep in mind is that this is most likely going to require us to go back and get land development approval. We'll have to show up and say, we want to build the 20 reserve spaces and show why. And then we're going to have a big discussion about what our projected enrollment is, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with
Right.
if we're going to build anything else.
And at LM, it wouldn't make any difference to the impervious surface because it's already covered, correct?
Whatever we do at LM, in addition to those 13 spaces we squeezed out, is going to have to be structured on top of something that's already impervious.
Impervious, so it doesn't have any effect on our impervious
Correct.
surface.
We're
And-
really
and-
close to the limit.
And is it possible to, there's a parking lot right next to where the buses are. Is it possible to extend this garage to all the way above that?
What I showed you, in fact, does that.
Oh, what you have already does
Right.
that? Okay. Thanks.
Can you just explain the difference in the process between having a parking garage constructed at Lower Merion, Harridan? Since it was already approved at Harridan, is it just land development at that point? And then what would you need to do to get it approved at Lower Merion?
Well, in each case, you would, and first of all, I'm no expert here on land development, but I've developed a certain expertise having sat in many meetings over the last 10-plus years. It's my understanding you would have to go through a land development process. And if you went in and said, for example, I want to build the reserve parking at Harriton, they would say, why do you want to build the reserve parking? And we would say, because we're experiencing enrollment growth. And they say, great, how much growth? And we say, we could have as many as whatever, say 1,600, 1,650 students, all right? And they said, well, okay, great, but you were approved for 1,250, so now we're dealing with 400 spaces. Okay, you want to build 20, but let's talk about the remainder, and that's where Frank's analysis comes back in, and we look at what we can empirically show that's required, and then we put additional parking in reserve. And it would be additional. It would be over and above what was already approved for Harriton.
Dr. McGinley, I think we have to go through zoning here as opposed to just land.
I don't know.
Oh, I thought we were told that because it had already been approved at Harridan that we would not have to go through.
I don't know that.
The parking structure at Harridan's for 82 spots, yet we need 56. The additional
That could
cost
be
of-
tailored. That could be tailored to a
So how-
smaller.
I mean, is there a per spot calculation?
Yes,
to-
there is. We use $20,000 per parking space.
So you scale back you're 26 over. If you scale that back,
It could be scaled back. I mean, the people who know more about parking decks would have to take a look at it, but certainly it could be scaled back.
Did that include cost of water management on the site? 'Cause we'd
Yes,
be
it did.
losing all that.
It
Okay.
did. And one reason we thought it would be better to put it over the teacher lot is we're already adjacent to a large underground basin that we can then expand. And I mentioned the cost of $20,000 for space. Some of you have probably already checked with your calculator. The number doesn't add up. The reason it doesn't add up is because on top of that, I added contingency escalation to 2014 and then soft costs, so.
I had a question for clarification on the Harriton parking summary. The one Plan D, 73 spaces, 142,000 plus bus move costs. Was that the fueling cost, or what does that 142,000 refer to? I'm on Plan
Yeah,
D,
I'm
scenario
going
one.
to, it refers to creating this situation you see right here.
Okay,
Right now, that's a large open space where the buses are parked from here all the way over to here where the fueling islands are. And so we want to create a space that's just for car parking, but we also want to have buses be able to come in and fuel, so we've created this separation.
so is that the same then for Lower Merion when the 144,000? When I'm looking at, it's crossed out in scenario one, but in scenario three, it shows up. Is that a similar reference to create an additional spacing for, I guess, movement of the buses?
No,
Movement of-
that is just additional parking that we could squeeze out on the site.
Okay,
I guess the difference between the two schools is that the bus fueling is right next to bus parking at Harriton. That's why we would have to do some modification to separate car parking from bus fueling. That doesn't occur here. So when the buses leave here, you just go in and restripe and you have your 44 spaces.
okay, thank you.
Just one last question. You had mentioned in the facilities meeting, I just want to confirm, the more time you have to make the changes, and the better. Is that correct? The more time you have to, so if it takes 20 to 24 months, if you had 36 months to make that
Absolutely,
decision.
yes.
Okay.
And certainly, every director of operations would give that answer in planning any project, that you want to have as long a time as possible. On the other hand, there are a lot of other competing priorities for everyone's time here. And so the longer this continues to be a subject of discussion and dialogue, then the less attention we pay to other important issues.
Marissa?
Just two clarifications. First is, when we're talking about the buses, these are buses that service the entire district. These are not just for the high schools, is that correct? They
Right,
just
these
park at the
buses,
two-
these buses service the entire district. I would say the majority come back and service their own school, but in general, they're
Right,
district
but the
assets.
reason we need more buses is because of the increased enrollments throughout the district, not just at the high schools. That's just-
Correct.
Right. And then second, I think you misspoke, and just for the record, so on page 22, when you have moved the buses, that's Lower Merion, and I think you said that was Harriton. You said it was 44 new spaces plus the driver spaces. I think you just slipped and said Harriton when you meant Lower Merion, but I just want to make sure.
You're correct.
Okay.
Where it says parking design G,
Right.
yeah, that's Lower
Great.
Merion.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Pat. We really appreciate it.
Next, we have an update on the design of the Welsh Valley project with our architect,
Sorry,
Danielle
I didn't
Hoffman.
realize there was
Yes.
more.
And we'll keep it as brief as possible.
Sorry, Pat.
I've spoken to Danielle several times on the phone today, and she assures me that
As brief as possible. I don't
This
mean
is
to
going to
be
be brief.
rude. We have students who are waiting to speak.
Is there a way I can point to stuff? First, I'd like to say that I don't have any numbers, charts, spreadsheets, or anything, just pretty pictures and plans.
see this, see how that
Yes,
shows it.
thank you. So I'm just going to give you an update of where we are with the Welsh Valley project. This is an enlargement of the administration area, and we've actually increased the size of the administration by, do I push it? By capturing the last classroom at the end of the administration area here. So what we've done is actually move the main entrance down to this area. This is actually what I call the breezeway of the building. We're going to create a new secure entrance vestibule and capturing the principal's office and the conference room and making that the administration office so that people need to check into the administration office before they go into the rest of the complex. The secretary's area for the principal is generally in the same location. We've enlarged the principal's office and created a conference room. The files room and the workroom are in the same location, and we're maintaining this access out to the courtyard area, which currently exists there now. Currently, there's like an alcove here for a waiting area for the assistant principals. We're actually creating new walls here to enhance the size of the principal's offices. And there's 2 toilet rooms that are existing here and here that are going to remain. We're providing another office/conference room for a potential future assistant principal's office. The special ed classroom and psychologist's office are currently at those locations, as well as the IDF room. But in that last classroom, we're creating a nurse's suite. And this is one of the enhancements that we've made to this particular plan, in that the nurse's suite that currently exists is very, very small and non-functional. And what we're doing is creating a new entrance vestibule out to the courtyard area with a covered canopy out to the covered canopy system on the courtyard, and creating a new nurse's suite with a reception desk, 3 cots, and actually 2 toilet rooms, one here which is going to be handicapped accessible with a shower, and another one located here, and then a private exam room. This new corridor that we're creating here is going to allow access from anybody in the nurse's office that needs to get out into the bus loop to for the students that may be sick during the day. This is what I called the breezeway. This is the area that we're going to create the new secured entrance vestibule, and it's actually going to be an enhancement to the lobby area as well. This set of windows here are going to be removed. The columns will remain. The overhead overhang of the roof here will be removed, as well as this roof and any column structures supporting it. Looking at the enlargement of that area, again, this is the new entrance vestibule that we're creating off of a new canopy area coming into the waiting area and into the lobby expansion. So this will be a now all-conditioned space and will be opened up into the lobby area that's here. We'll also have doors going out to the covered canopy system, and this is the door going into the cafeteria area. To capture some space in the cafeteria, we're removing the existing faculty dining room in the cafeteria area and creating a new faculty dining room area where the current sewing room is, and creating a hallway here to get to it. So there's some modifications associated with that hallway that we're putting in, because currently the sewing room is accessed through the cooking lab. If you look at the plans as far as the coloring, the color has nothing to do with anything. It's just a representation of the materials, the floor materials that we're going to be providing in that area. This area is going to have a walk-off mat. It's called Water Hog. It's to absorb the dirt and water coming in with students or people access into the building at both entry points to the lobby expansion area. The area identified in green is going to be base bid of a terrazzo material, and then we'll have a bid alternate for something less expensive. The area shown here we're proposing to do is display cases with glass display off of the lobby area.
Ms. Hoffer, could you just do a little less detail and a
Yep,
little
here we go.
faster? Thanks.
All right, taking a section through the lobby area, looking at the administration area. We're popping up the roof in this area and then tying it back into the existing roof system of the cafeteria. Looking at the cross-section of the building, we're actually replicating the profile of the existing roof that's found in the rest of the campus plan. This is actually the roof line of the cafeteria that we're tying into. And that's to just tie the whole complex together. This is an existing photograph of one of the stair on one of the other buildings on the campus. The existing canopy here will be removed. That exists there now, and the new elevation off of the bus loop is here. Obviously, you have a clear identification of where your new entrance to the building is at this point. This is looking at the courtyard area and the area that we're going to be putting the expansion in. Taking a section through that, the raised area is symmetrical with the auditorium, and you can see the limits of construction in existing areas. Looking at the overall campus plan, we've talked about having that canopy tie into the through corridor at the new expansion area. We're also going to be providing an alternate to complete that canopy system so we can connect all the buildings by a covered canopy. We're still evaluating looking at the canopy going into the gymnasium area, because that's currently, I think I took 1 or 2 slides off. That area has some issues associated with the outline of the existing basketball court. Looking at the basement floor level, this will be at the same floor level as the first floor elevation of building A in the link. Basically a utilitarian floor level and a stairway to get up to the first floor level, which will be at the same floor elevation as the elevation of building B. We have a new stair tower that will be accessed off of the courtyard to access into the new addition. Classrooms, this is the through corridor that I talked about to get to the bus loop area. And classrooms largely serving the world language departments and some special ed classrooms here. On the second floor, the toilet rooms are stacked above, and we have 2 science classrooms with a movable partition. This area here is actually, we don't need the additional classrooms, but it'll be designed to be able to construct additional classrooms at that location if in the future you need it. But for right now, we're showing it as a roofed area. And looking at a section through that area, basically you're following the same profile as the gym and beyond it, although you can see that we're covering up the windows and the louvers here so that we can tie the new addition into that end of the building, but there still will be additional windows to bring natural light into the gymnasium. Looking at a section through the other direction, we're going to be tying into this link spandrel glass area, which will be removed. And you can see the profile of the building, the stair tower coming in from the courtyard area, and you can see the grade differential to the existing floor level at building A. We talked about this before, that we're going to be replicating a lot of the details in the rest of the complex. Oops, don't do that. This is the railing system and the link, which we're going to be replicating in the new addition. We're still looking at some colors and details. We're talking about that with the facility committee. So that's still in process. This is actually the elevation on the courtyard side. And again, a detail, looking at some of the details of the building. This green line here is the downspout from the standing seam metal roof. And another thing that we're looking at is doing a loading dock expansion where we're going to be pulling. This is actually half in the building, half outside of the building. We're going to be pulling that out even further to capture some space in the kitchen area. And that'll be something that you'll see as we bid this project. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing none. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions right now? Are there any questions? If you, excuse me, I know that there are two students here who want to address the board. Are there two, or there's three? And if I allow you to go now, are you going to be able to go home once you're done? Then what I'd like to do now is just allow these students to speak so they can get home and get some sleep. I know they're very busy. Can you speak at the end of the meeting when we do the? Oh. Okay, we'll go with just, if it's okay with everyone else, just this group, if we could have just this group to give their comments now.
How many speakers are there altogether? Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so why don't we do that so that they can
Right.
go home, and then we'll continue with the rest of our meeting. So if you could please sign in with Ms. LaPera, and if you can please state your name and where you live, and then also please, stay to the 3 minutes. We'd appreciate it.
Can I begin while they're signing in? Okay. Good evening, members of the board, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Amy Buckman, and I'm the secretary of the Lower Merion High School Football Boosters. I'm here along with several other members of our organization who are seated over there, and the captains of the Lower Merion High School football team, Billy Buckman, Jack Garton, Nate Goodwin, and we have one captain who couldn't be here tonight, Ari Weiland. You may recall that Jack and Billy addressed you last week after receiving their National Merit Commendations. And the boys spoke with you about the same topic I would like to address this evening, and that is the topic of lights at Arnold Field for Friday night football games at Lower Merion High School. On Friday night, September 20th, the boosters arranged to rent lights so that the boys on the team could do something that almost all high school football players across the country do: play a Friday night home game. All other teams in the Central League play on Friday nights. That includes the students at Harriton High School. Their lights are paid for by the district. But this was only the second night game at LM. The last one was back in 2006, when once again the football boosters raised the funds themselves for temporary lights. The boys shared with you last week the excitement they felt when they were able to run out onto the field to the cheers of about 1,000 classmates and community members. In contrast, our Saturday afternoon home games rarely draw more than 50 fans. That night, many neighbors and their families attended, happy to share in the tradition and community spirit. The police reported no negative incidents related to the game. Since that night, the boosters have spoken with LM Principal Sean Hughes and Activities Director Don Walsh. They have both expressed their support for lights at Arnold Field for Friday night football games. Now, I know that in the past there have been rumblings that neighbors are against the concept of lights, but we as the football boosters have to wonder why this would even be an issue. As I stated earlier, almost every high school in America plays Friday night games. The natural assumption, therefore, of anyone buying a home near a high school stadium would be that on a half dozen Friday nights between September and November, the stadium would be in use. The games are over around 9:30. And these are the same neighbors who are free to use the LM track and the tennis courts. In the end, we see this as a question of fairness, and one that will only be exaggerated with the upcoming likely expansion of the choice zone. Lower Merion has a proud football history. The rivalry with Radnor is the longest continuous public high school rivalry in the country. But upcoming football players, given a choice between playing under the lights at Harriton or in relative obscurity at Lower Merion, will likely choose the program that appears to be more exciting and have more support from the board. We really don't believe that the board or the community wants the program of Lower Merion football to end. We value the tradition of Lower Merion football and the experience it provides for our sons and for the school community. Therefore, the football boosters would like to ask the board to pursue installing lights for Friday night games at Arnold Field, and we ask for your advice on how to proceed to make this a reality.
Okay, thank you. Are you speaking? The next speaker? I'm sorry. Are you speaking?
I would just like to, I'm sorry, I'm just
You
like
have to
to add
speak-
a few points
Can you
quickly.
speak in, say your name, please,
Oh, I'm
and then
sorry.
speak into the mic, otherwise people won't be able to hear you
I'm
what it's
Jack
take.
Garton. I play football for Lower Merion High School, and I'm from Ballackinwood. Cap, yes. I would just like to add that these lights, if implemented, could be used for other sports as well, not just for the football team. I know this won't be for us. This will be for future players, but the girls' soccer team, for instance, had a senior day where about 20 students came out because they were playing on a Saturday morning at 11 o'clock in the morning. And our boys' soccer team, which has had a lot of success this year and is currently undefeated, has had to play a lot of games, very awkward times in the morning, and that a lot of students would like to get out and support the teams, but it becomes rather difficult when our sports teams are playing at such peculiar times. And Springfield High School went through a similar scenario in trying to acquire lights for their football team, and there was a lot of resistance from the community, but their program, which was struggling at the time, has seen a great resurgence, and I'm sure Mr. Klein could speak to that as well, as he is a teacher here at Lower Merion. And just like to add lastly that as members of the school board, I think that creating a Lower Merion community has been a great priority of yours, as we've seen with the run one school, one book, one community thing, and that lights here would not just create a greater support for our sports teams, but they would help enrich the community as well and create more, interaction with everyone. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming out.
So just a couple of comments, because I'm trusting that you're sincerely asking for just a bit of advice. First of all, the issue of fairness in pay. We spend more on Lower Merion football than we spend on Harrington football, and when you do that per pupil, unfortunately, it's way more because our numbers are low. And I agree that if we had Friday night football, that would be an enhancement. The proposals like this, and I lived in Abington, and they eventually got lights. Whenever there haven't been lights on a stadium, and in Cheltenham they eventually got lights, where I was superintendent before, it's always a negotiation with the neighbors in the township, and there are always huge strings attached, even when you're successful in getting it done, as is in Springfield, Abington, Cheltenham, where they've existed for a long time. The parameters are different. So the way that this proposal has to emerge is, you've said that it has the support of Mr. Hughes and our athletic director, Don Walsh, and I'm sure that it does if you said it, but what we need to do is from the high school get a proposal that kind of lays it out. And there are issues of equity with football and other sports. There are issues of equity between genders that all need to be considered. And before we would say this is what we were proposed to the board, we would have to have worked all that out and propose it to the board first and then negotiate with the township. And in every time that we've made any modification, and Mr. Ganan's hair wasn't that color when he started negotiating, with the neighbors, there's a series of meetings, there's a series of events, but this kind of thing can be done. I'm not saying this to say it can't be done, but it comes as a proposal from the high school where they've sorted out a whole bunch of other issues before it comes over to the board, and that's the way this needs to proceed. And I can think of several other districts that have gotten it done. It always ends up with some strings attached, or a lot of strings attached. And so, Abington spent $400,000 on a stadium with lights, and they're limited to using it 13 times a year. And so, those kinds of things happen when you build something in an existing neighborhood that's close to other homes. So, but thank you so much. It does need to come back from.
I'm sorry. First of all, we need you to speak at the mic. Perhaps
We'll just take one question. That's fine.
It was our understanding that there was to be a facilities feasibility study underway for stadium plans. Can we get any sort of update as to where that study is at this point?
There has been a preliminary review of the stadium, but we have had other things going on and we haven't gotten back to that. So I don't know if there's a status. There's no public status report of that study, but that is something that has been in the works since the construction of the new LM. Pat, do you have anything to add?
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to continue with the regular agenda at this point, and we will have an opportunity for public comment as well at the end of the meeting.
So under Human Resources, I'm recommending the Board of School Directors approve human resource action items as listed in HR 1 through HR 6.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I need to recuse myself from HR 1.
Okay. Go ahead.
Just two comments. I want to thank Mr. Hughes, Dr. Marseille, and Dr. McGinley for addressing the issue of finding the long-term sub for high school Latin at LM. I got a lot of calls about that, and I'm very happy to see that that's been resolved.
Okay, do you have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion passes.
Next is the report of the Curriculum Committee, Dr. Van Lynch, followed by the Educational Services items that will be handled by Dr. Marseille.
Thank you, Dr. McGinley. The Curriculum Committee met on Tuesday. When did we meet? September? No, it wasn't September. October 15th. I'm sorry. I have the wrong date here. Tuesday, October 8th. I'm sorry. Our first topic was a report from Dr. DeRosa and Ms. Nancy Aconchia Mesa on the after-school program. In the interest of time, I'm not going to highlight the program report, as a lot of that was presented last year in terms of the review of the program. However, we are gearing up for another after-school program, the 2013-14 program, where 98 4th and 5th grade students have been invited to attend. The reading program will utilize the Level Literacy Intervention Reading Program, as well as a PSSA support coach. And the math program will utilize the Investigations, Differentiation, and Intervention Guide, again, also with a PSSA support coach. Sessions will run from October 15th through March 6th and be held after school in the District Administration Building on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Students will be bused from their home schools, given a snack, participate in transition activities, and materials to work with. Students will also be transported home. Data collection will include both pre and post foresight assessments, as well as formative assessments to be used to guide and modify instruction throughout the program. The program is funded by the Accountability Block Grant as well as district funds. We also had a presentation from Mr. O'Brien, Director of the International Baccalaureate Program. He provided the committee with the history as well as what he sees as the future of the program. Mr. O'Brien shared both quantitative as well as qualitative successes as they relate to IB in the district. And the program has been around since 1997 and has grown from a class of 25 students in 2003 to a class of 63 expected graduates in 2015. Quite a bit of data was shared, and we have all of our slides posted on the website, so I would encourage anyone interested to take a look at some of the issues that were presented, particularly on the IB program. We got quite a bit of detail there. But just briefly, Mr. O'Brien expressed his commitment as a director to closing the achievement gap. He shared that the program uses a data-driven process to identify, encourage application, and support students who may not fit the traditional profile of an IB student. As of 2014 and 2015, 7 African American juniors and seniors will be eligible for the IB diploma. Mr. O'Brien concluded the presentation sharing with the committee the approaches to teaching and learning that IB uses, as well as teacher and student testimony that address both the academic and affective successes that the program has afforded many students who have participated. Our meeting concluded with a presentation from Dr. Marseille and Mr. Cody on the PSSA and Keystone data. We covered 2 areas briefly and continued the discussion in the Education Committee meeting, and we'll continue our discussion in our November meeting. Our November meeting will take place on Monday, and note the change in day. Monday, November 4th, 2013, since Election Day is November 5th, and the schools and administration buildings will be closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Under Educational Services, the administration recommends that the Board of Schools Directors approves educational services items as listed. Overnight field trips request per Exhibit CS-1 through CS-12.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
The administration recommends that the Board of School Directors approves the independent consultant contract for Dr. Stephanie Height per Exhibit CS-13. Dr. Height is educational consultant for elementary and secondary district teaching professionals.
You can also do Ms. Glauner's.
Sure. In addition to that, we ask for recommendation for the approval of the Montgomery County Intermediate Units Agreement for professional development services performed by Ms. Kendall Glauner, Assistant Director of Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development per Exhibit CS-14.
Are there any questions?
Just quickly, and I think it might have been mentioned before, but just for clarification, both consultants are to help us with developing the teacher evaluation process?
Yes, both consultants are going to be supporting teachers and thinking more critically about the domains 1 through 4 with the Anderson framework.
Okay, thank you. Move to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes.
Thank you. Under Student Services, the administration recommends the Board of School Directors approve student services items as listed, and these are agreements for students receiving educational services from outside service providers.
Do you have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
The next 4 items are agreements with various agencies to provide direct services and/or training. The first one is with the American Red Cross for CPR training. The second one is for Biata Healthcare for nursing services. The third one is in-service provided by Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, and the last one is Quinn Developmental Services, an agreement for on-site behavioral consultants.
Are there
I'm
any
recommending
questions?
approval of all 4.
Just quickly, Dr. McGinley, CPR training for the aides, do our coaches get CPR training? And
Yes.
Oh, they
Yes,
do?
they do.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve? Thank you. Second?
A second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion's pass.
Next is the report of the Facilities and Purchasing Committee from Mr. Novick, followed by Business and Finance items from Mr. Orlando.
Thank you, Dr. McGinley. The Facilities Committee met on Thursday morning, July 11th. All the agenda items, including the list of bills and the purchasing report, were reviewed and discussed. Among the highlights, we discussed having Pat Gannan talk to us next month about a review of the E&O, the errors and omissions change orders from the high school projects. We discussed the agreement with Narberth Borough to share in the cost of a crossing guard in the coming year, and it's this year, for this year. We also talked about the extension of the agreement with Converge Energy as a means to reduce overall energy demand during peak usage events. We've been participating in this program since the fall of 2011, and so far the district has received more than $150,000 in revenue from the program, and we are agreeing to, if we vote for it, we will extend the program for another couple of years. We reviewed the budgets of the elementary school and middle school projects, Ballackinwood Middle School, Gladwin Elementary School, Penn Valley Elementary School, and Walsh Valley Middle School. We are net over budget, just around $15,000. As we've discussed in previous meetings, I won't go into detail here. Our soft costs are way over budget, and our hard costs are well under budget, so they just about net out. The Ballackinwood Middle School interior work is scheduled to be completed by the end of this month. The Penn Valley Elementary School contracts for the classroom expansions were signed on October 10th, 2013. And due to the need for those classrooms in the fall of 2014, we bid out those projects and accepted bids for the modular construction, again, that we've talked about previously. At Gladwin and Welsh Valley, we have changed to the stick-built construction. We anticipate awarding bids for Gladwin in December 2013, with completion pushed off until late fall 2014. And at Welsh Valley, we received Lower Merion Planning Commission approval on the project, and bids are anticipated to be awarded in March 2014 based on an accelerated schedule. And then finally, we had a presentation from Pat Gannan on the projected high school enrollment increase and the facilities needs, which we've replicated tonight. Thank you.
Under the Business Office and Finance, we have 4 recommended action items. Approve list of bills for payment, approve the financial report for September 2013, receipt of the first quarter student activity reports per Exhibit BF-1, and approve donation from a parent for some musical instruments to Gladwin Elementary.
So first of all, we would like to very much thank did you say it was a parent? Linda Totaro from Gladwin Elementary School for the donation, so we really appreciate that. Are there any questions? Do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Thank you. Second? Second. Thanks, Jerry. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion's passed.
Under Facilities and Operations, we have 3 recommended action items. Approve the school crossing guard agreement with Narberth Borough Council, approve the extension of the agreement with Converge, Inc., and approve the change orders for the Ballacoma Middle School, and they are in Exhibits FO1 through FO4.
Are there any questions? Do you have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Thank you. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion's passed.
Just like to thank the people of Narberth for acting on that crossing guard agreement and getting it all in place for us. They actually did that a year ahead before they came to us to share the costs.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, we're now going to move to business of the Board of School Directors, and we have a report of the Policy Committee by Ms. Suba Robinson.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. The minutes of the Policy Committee meeting are from October 10th, 2013. We have a policy up for a second reading, Policy 806, Child Student Abuse, and it reflects the change that all volunteers supervising an overnight trip need to get proper clearances prior to their chaperoning a trip, regardless of their affiliation with a particular student. Do we need to stop there?
We can do that.
Okay.
Since we have to vote on that.
Yeah, we have to vote on 806.
Okay, so are there any questions on Policy 806, which is for a second read? This has been discussed at multiple policy meetings as well as being brought in front of this meeting.
Just clarification, in terms of the cost of the clearances for parent volunteers, where did we end up on that, if you could remind me? That would be a cost.
Where is Meg? It's Megan.
My recollection is that the cost was to be borne by parents unless there was an inability on the part of the parent to afford that cost, in which case we would step in and assist with that.
And then we're considering regulations to make sure that parents have enough lead time to get those clearances satisfied prior to participating.
Correct, and we've all already begun the communication with principals as well as ISC. I let them know what the status of that particular policy was so they could spread the word through the HSA as well.
Great.
There are also situations where clearances are required for overnight trips, and in many cases, the cost of X number of chaperones to get clearances is factored into the overall cost of the trip.
Okay, thank you.
What is the cost of a clearance?
It's $10 for the child abuse clearance.
Oh,
Money.
so it's just $10. And how long is that effective for?
A year.
So in theory, you could let parents know ahead of time who are going to be active in school programs, and they can get it and not have to worry about being on time for a particular trip.
Correct,
Just a
yes.
I just want to clarify, we are also doing criminal background in addition to child abuse, correct?
The child abuse clearance form for volunteers does appear to necessitate having the criminal background checked as well. So that is something that needs to be provided in order for the clearance to be processed on the state level.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, then, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. You can-
I'll continue with the minutes. Policy 007 is up for a first reading. The change to this policy is that the language was removed about how members of the public could record public meetings to remove outdated restrictions and to alert the public in attendance at meetings that their remarks at meetings could potentially be recorded by any member of the public. Policy 107 was also discussed, course guides. There was no substantive changes to this policy. It was just updated to, as part of the periodic review of policies, to reflect current practice with state and other standards. Policy 815 is up for a first reading as well. The main change is to include e-cigarettes as part of the non-smoking policy of the school. And we discussed 3 other policies not up for a first reading: textbooks, resource materials, and instructional supplies. Let's see. We got an update on AR 206, assignment of pupils within the district, which we've discussed in detail tonight. And the next meeting of this policy committee is November 8th at 8:30 a.m.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robinson. Dr. McKinley?
Yes. So those items don't need to vote, but this one does. We're recommending the Board of School Directors approve the following schedule of regular monthly business meetings from January 2014 through August 2014. These dates accommodate the regulations under Act 1 for the development of budgets and approvals of budgets.
Jerry and I discussed this, and there are not enough meetings here, so
We'll take that into consideration. So, is there a motion to approve?
I have a question.
Oh, you have a question? I'm so sorry.
Yeah. I just, I think it says all meetings will be in the administration building at 8 o'clock, and I think just the phrase, unless otherwise designated. Doesn't it say all meetings?
It does go in, when it's advertised, there's a whole thing that I have to put in the advertisement. This was just for the dates only.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so do I have a motion to approve?
with great enthusiasm.
I second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. I do this? Okay, thanks. There's a recommended action that the Board of School Directors approves the superintendent's goals for the 2013-14 school year in the form presented to the board per Exhibit BD5. And what this is these are, I know it has been a couple, I meant to ask about that, but it's been a couple of months since we discussed it. But these are the superintendent's goals for the current academic year, and I believe that once we approve them, they're going to be posted on the website, correct? Excellent. So that's what we're going to do, and we spent a lot of time discussing this, and so at this time, looking to approve it. So do I have a motion to approve?
I so move.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Are there other committee reports? Mrs. Pollard?
As chair of the Communications Committee, we have not had a meeting, and our meeting will be on Wednesday here in the boardroom at 8 o'clock. But, PM.
No, but
I'm not sure of the time. I think it's earlier than that. Is it 8?
It says 8 PM.
It is 8 p.m.
Yeah.
8?
Okay.
But last week, Dr. Van Lynch and I worked representatives from the school board to the Pennsylvania School Board Association Convention in Hershey. It was really sad being in Hershey. I just wanted you to know. But in lieu of time, I just want to go over just a couple of things. Dr. Van Lynch will speak on our keynote speaker and summarize what he did. But I attended a seminar with the First Lady Corbett on helping young people not to drop out of school. Also, one of the speakers was Captain Phillips. And his topic was steering your ship through rough waters, and it's basically how we handle challenges in the school system and how it even related to his being hijacked by Somalians. And also one of the speakers was Caitlin Rogue, and her topic was defining purpose. And she is a teacher that saved 15 of her students plus herself in the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre. Also, we had many exhibits, and I was very proud and pleased for how do school libraries help Pennsylvania students achieve academic success. And our own Mr. Tapp from Penn Win was featured on one of the handouts. So, and there was a poster and essay contest. We did not have any posters included, but an essay was submitted and recognized with honorable mention by an 8th grader at Ballackinwood Middle School, Harley Marovich. And so, wonderful time. And I thank the board for allowing us to go.
I too
Thank you for going for us.
Yeah, thank the board for having us represent. One of the first presentations we saw was Dr. Pedro Noguera, who really set the tone for the conference and talked a lot about how do we manage not only the achievement gap, but also what does that look like in terms of school leadership. Dr. Noguera years ago was a school board member himself. He didn't have such a wonderful experience, but certainly he was able to bring some of his scholarly expertise to that experience. Two takeaways, just again in the interest of time, and Reverend Pollard and I talked quite a bit about this. He talked about the work that we do as school board directors and administrators and a community around technical work and adaptive work. And certainly we know we have to keep the lights on and we have to make sure the doors are open and our students are safe. But indeed, it's the adaptive work that he says so well that really, how do we get our kids excited about learning? It's not just about how well they do on the test or how many tests, et cetera, but essentially when we walk into classrooms or when we do our work as directors, how do we ensure that our students are excited? So it was a very productive week and nice bonding time for myself and Reverend Pollard. And so we're looking forward to sharing additional information with our colleagues.
Thank you, and also thank you on behalf of the whole board for representing us. I'm sure you did that very well. So at this time, I would like to ask if there's anyone from the public who would like to come up and give a comment at this time. Please come in and sign in. I'm not sure. You have to ask Ms. LaPera. She's the one who makes
It's agenda.
Just a fast note. I live on Worcester Road right here, and when you talk about the traffic issue, it's not just Owen. It's Worcester and Hamilton and Powell, and all morning long, those cars and vans are coming down those streets fast and dropping their kids off, going back around quickly back out to Montgomery. It is, you're taking your life in your hands at that time for any pedestrian. As opposed to Harriton, which is a much larger, less congested community. Just that comment. My other comment, which I've made several times over the years, is that we're always looking for an achievement gap solution after the fact, when all the studies show that early childhood is where the emphasis should be. If we can't do pre-K, we can at least do full-day kindergarten for the at-risk students, so that by the 4th grade, they don't have to go to special classes. By the 11th grade, they're not failing on the SPSATs. The earlier we intervene, the more success there will be. Thank you.
Actually, Ms. Jenkins, there's a proposal around doing just that that's coming to the curriculum committee of the board that we worked on all of last year, intervening and providing some extended time for kindergarten students. But there are other early targeted interventions that we have put into place. So I agree with you there that it's best to invest early.
Okay, thank you. I've already put in my plug for the Education Foundation event on November 9th. I'm going to read the Sunshine Act announcements and upcoming meetings. So on September 23rd, we met in executive session to discuss real estate. On October 14th, we met in executive session to discuss personnel. Future board meetings. October 23rd, 8 p.m., we have a communications committee meeting, which is an opportunity for people to come and I think we're calling it a public hearing around the proposal to expand choice. November 4th, 8:30 a.m. curriculum committee meeting. November 8th, 8:30 a.m. policy committee meeting. November 11th, 8 p.m. education committee meeting. November 14th, 8:30 a.m. facilities. That's not usually. It's a mistake. 8 a.m. Okay. November. I'm sorry. Let me say that again. November 14th, 8 a.m. facilities and purchasing committee meeting. November 18th, 8 p.m. regular board meeting, and November 20th, 8:30 a.m. communications committee meeting. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.